Listen, I'm going to tell you a story about the night the Vrexian cubs got loose on Station Kepler 9. And I swear on every star in the Andromeda sector that this actually happened. You're not going to believe half of it. But that's your problem, not mine. Station Kepler 9 was what the diplomatic corps liked to call a vital hub of interspecies cooperation and cultural exchange. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. What it actually was, if we're being honest here, was a glorified shopping mall in space, where about 40 different species tried very hard not to accidentally insult each other while conducting trade negotiations. The Vrexians sold their fancy computational crystals. The Threshik peddled their medicinal fungi that smelled like a gym locker had achieved sentience. And humans, well, humans sold coffee and audacity in equal measure. The thing about Station Kepler 9 was that it ran on a strict schedule. And I mean strict. The station administrator, a Quillix named Vormathin, who had exactly zero sense of humor and approximately 7,000 rules memorized, insisted that every species maintain appropriate temporal protocols, which meant that when the humans decided to operate on their own circadian rhythms, completely ignoring the station's designated rest cycle, Vormathin would vibrate with such intense bureaucratic fury that his scales would change colors. It was honestly kind of entertaining. Now, the Vrexians were these massive, bear-like creatures, except instead of regular fur, they had this iridescent coat that shifted through purples and blues depending on their mood. They stood about 8 feet tall on their hind legs, had these enormous padded paws, and facial features that made them look perpetually concerned about whether they left the oven on. They were also, and this is important, some of the most devoted parents in the known galaxy. Vrexian cubs stayed with their mothers for almost 5 standard years, during which time said mothers would literally fight a supernova if it looked at their babies wrong. Which brings us to Ambassador Kelrathi and her 3 cubs, Mirren, Tolo, and little Jesker, who was the youngest and had the survival instincts of a lemming with a death wish. Kelrathi was on the station for trade negotiations, because apparently the Galactic Coalition had decided that the best time to discuss revised tariff structures on computational technology was the same week she was traveling with 3 energetic cubs who thought that staying in one place was a suggestion rather than a rule. The cubs were, objectively speaking, adorable. They were about 3 feet tall, covered in fluffy purple fur that made them look like ambulatory stuffed animals. And they had these huge eyes that could make even Vormathin's cold, bureaucratic heart skip a beat. They were also, objectively speaking, absolute menaces to ordered society. It started on a Tuesday, or at least it was Tuesday according to the human calendar, which nobody else used but the humans insisted on referencing anyway, because they were like that. Kelrathi had been in Conference Room 7 for approximately 6 hours, discussing something mind-numbingly boring about crystalline export quotas, when her cubs decided that the family quarters were significantly less interesting than literally anywhere else on the station. Mirren, the oldest at what translated to roughly 7 human years, managed to figure out the door's locking mechanism. This should have been impossible, considering Vrexian paws weren't designed for fine manipulation, and the lock was supposedly cub-proof. The universe has yet to encounter anything that can truly be cub-proofed. Evolution always wins. By the time Kelrathi emerged from her meeting, exhausted and desperately in need of whatever passed for wine in Vrexian culture, her cubs were gone. The quarters were empty. The panic that set in was immediate and all-consuming. The kind of fear that bypasses rational thought and goes straight to, I am a terrible parent, and my children are being eaten by space pirates. She immediately contacted station security, which consisted of two very tired humans named Marcus and Chen, who rotated shifts and mostly dealt with noise complaints, and the occasional drunk Threschik, who thought starting philosophical debates at Oro 300 hours was appropriate social behavior. Marcus took the report with the kind of weary professionalism that suggested this was not his first missing cub situation. "All right, ma'am. 3 cubs, purple fur, big eyes. How long have they been missing?" "I do not know," Kelrathi said, her translator rendering her distress in flat mechanical tones that completely failed to convey her mounting hysteria. "Perhaps 2 hours? Perhaps less? I was in negotiations and I thought they would be safe." "They'll turn up," Marcus said, which was easy for him to say, because he didn't have 3 small children wandering around a space station with approximately 8,000 ways to accidentally kill themselves. "Station secure. They can't get into any restricted areas." This was a lie, but it was a comforting lie, which is sometimes the best kind. Here's what actually happened while Marcus was being reassuring. The cubs, delighted by their newfound freedom, had immediately embarked on what they considered to be an adventure, and what any responsible adult would consider a cascade of increasingly terrible decisions. Mirren, being the oldest and therefore nominally in charge, had decided they should find their mother. This was actually a reasonable goal. The methodology, however, was not. "Mother is tall," Mirren reasoned in the logic-adjacent way of children everywhere. "We must go to the tall places." Tolo, who was maybe 6 in human years and had fur that shifted more toward blue when he was excited, agreed enthusiastically. "The tall places? Yes. This is wisdom." Jesker, who was 4 and mostly just followed his siblings while periodically trying to eat things that were definitely not food, nodded and immediately attempted to lick a maintenance panel. The tall places, as it turned out, included the observation deck on level 7, the cargo bay with the 40-foot ceilings on level 3, and most ambitiously, the central atrium that stretched through 12 levels of the station like a massive vertical corridor, with viewing platforms at every level. They started with the observation deck. Getting there required taking a lift, which the cubs had never operated alone before. Mirren stood on Tolo's shoulders, while Jesker provided what he believed was helpful support by making encouraging chirping sounds. They managed to hit a button. It was not the correct button. Instead of level 7, they ended up in the commercial sector on level 5, where approximately 30 different shops were beginning to close for the station's rest cycle. This is where they encountered the first human. Her name was Rachel Kimura, and she ran a small cafe that served what she aggressively marketed as the best coffee in 3 sectors. This was probably not true, but her customers were too dependent on caffeine to argue. She was in the process of wiping down tables when 3 small, furry children wandered into her establishment like they owned the place. "Oh, hell no," Rachel said, which her translator wisely chose not to interpret literally for the cubs. "Whose kids are you?" The cubs stared at her. Humans were still relatively new to the station, and the cubs had never seen one up close. Rachel was tall by human standards, maybe 5'10", with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and an expression that suggested she had stopped being surprised by anything years ago. "We search for Mother," Mirren announced with great dignity. "She is tall. Are you tall?" Rachel looked down at the 3 sets of enormous eyes currently pinning her with the desperate hope of children who were definitely lost and trying not to admit it. "I'm going to regret this," she muttered. Then, louder, Okay, listen up, furballs. What's your mom's name? Ambassador Kelrathi of House Mirren, seventh claw of the Western Reaches, keeper of the Crystal Vaults, and representative to the Galactic Coalition. Mirren recited perfectly. Of course she is, Rachel said. And I'm guessing you three decided to go on a little walkabout without telling anyone. Three heads tilted in unison, processing. Tolo ventured, "What is walkabout?" "It means you ran off like a bunch of tiny furry anarchists," Rachel said. She pulled out her comm unit. "Let me call security." Except her comm unit was dead, because she'd forgotten to charge it, because of course she had. "Right," Rachel said. "Okay, new plan. You three are going to stay right here while I close up, and then we're going to find your mom." This was a reasonable plan. It did not survive contact with reality. The moment Rachel turned her back to lock the cafe's register, Jesker spotted something shiny in the window of the shop across the corridor. Before Mirren could stop him, the youngest cub had bolted, moving with the kind of speed that small children achieve through sheer enthusiasm. "No, no, no," Mirren hissed, and took off after his brother. Tolo, not wanting to be left behind, followed. Rachel turned around to find her cafe completely empty of cubs. "You have got to be kidding me," she said to the universe at large. The universe, as usual, did not respond. Rachel did what any sensible human would do in that situation. She grabbed her jacket, locked up the cafe in record time, and jogged after three purple fluff balls who had apparently decided that staying in one place was for quitters. The cubs, meanwhile, had discovered the joys of the central atrium. The atrium was beautiful, in that sterile sort of way that government-designed spaces tend to be. It was all clean lines and soft lighting, with plants from 24 different worlds creating a sort of interspecies botanical garden down the middle. The platforms jutted out from the walls at each level, connected by transparent walkways that gave the impression of walking through open air. To the cubs, it looked like the greatest playground in the history of the galaxy. Jesker had his face pressed against the railing, staring down at the 12-story drop with the fearlessness of something that doesn't understand gravity yet. Tolo was trying to climb one of the support pillars, because apparently spiders and small children share evolutionary traits. Mirren, to his credit, was trying to corral his siblings with the exhausted determination of the oldest child everywhere. "We must continue searching," Mirren said, grabbing Jesker by the scruff. "Mother is not here." "But this place is tall," Tolo protested from halfway up his pillar. "You said we must go to tall places." "Yes, but Mother is not here now. We must go to other tall places." This logic seemed to satisfy Tolo, who dropped down and landed with a soft thump. They were about to move on when Rachel caught up to them, slightly winded and significantly annoyed. "Okay, seriously, you three need to stop moving," she said, putting her hands on her knees and catching her breath. "Your mom is probably losing her mind right now." "You ran," Jesker observed with great interest. "You're very slow." "Thanks, kid. Love the feedback?" Rachel pulled out her comm unit again, remembered it was dead, and swore quietly. "Right. Okay. Change of plans. We're going to security office on level 2, and we're going all together, and nobody is running off. Got it?" Three heads nodded with the kind of solemn sincerity that means absolutely nothing. They made it approximately 50 feet before Tolo spotted a Threshic merchant struggling with a hovercart full of fungal containers and decided that helping was mandatory. He darted forward, grabbed the edge of the cart with his paws, and pulled. The cart, not designed for enthusiastic cub assistance, tipped. 6 containers of medicinal fungi tumbled onto the deck. The Threshic, a long centipede-like being named Chithrix, made a sound like steam escaping from a radiator. "Fledgling, stop, cease, desist your aid." "I help," Tolo announced proudly. "You did not help. You created chaos." Rachel jogged over. "I am so sorry. He's not mine. But I'm trying to get them back to their mom." Chithrix's antennae twitched in what might have been understanding or might have been a deepening desire to file a formal complaint. "Young ones lack wisdom. This is universal truth. Go, before more containers fall." Rachel didn't need to be told twice. She scooped up Tolo, who weighed approximately 40 pounds of squirming fluff, and deposited him back with his brothers. "No more helping?" "But helping is good," Tolo protested. "Not your kind of helping." They resumed their journey toward the security office, which should have been a simple 10-minute walk. It took 45 minutes, because the cubs moved like they were on a sightseeing tour, and Rachel was constantly having to prevent them from touching things, climbing things, or attempting to communicate with various species who did not appreciate being chirped at by small purple children. By the time they reached the security office, Rachel was ready to reconsider every life choice that had led her to this moment. Marcus looked up from his desk, took in the sight of one exhausted human and 3 energetic cubs, and started laughing. "Found them, did you?" "They found me," Rachel corrected. "They wandered into my cafe." "Any chance you've got a frantic Vrexian ambassador looking for these 3? "Oh, we've got way more than that," Marcus said, still grinning. He tapped his console. "Ambassador Kelrathi launched a full-scale search operation about 3 hours ago. We've got 20 people looking for these guys." "They were right here the whole time," Rachel said, gesturing at the cubs, who were now investigating Marcus's desk with great interest. "Ma'am, this station has 47 square kilometers of corridors. Right here is relative." Marcus sent out a station-wide alert that the cubs had been found, which should have been the end of the story. It was not the end of the story, because Ambassador Kelrathi was on level 9, investigating a storage area where someone had reported seeing small purple creatures, and it would take her approximately 20 minutes to reach the security office. And in those 20 minutes, with the adrenaline of the search wearing off and the station's rest cycle in full effect, 3 small cubs suddenly realized they were exhausted. Marin's eyes started drooping first. He curled up in one of the chairs in the security office's waiting area, his tail wrapped around himself. Tolo followed moments later, leaning against his brother. Jesker, fighting sleep like it was a personal enemy, managed to stay awake for another 3 minutes before toppling over onto his side with a soft woof. Rachel, who had been planning to leave now that the cubs were safely with security, looked at the pile of sleeping fluff balls and felt something in her chest do an uncomfortable squeeze. "They're out," Marcus observed unnecessarily. "Yeah, I can see that. Ambassador should be here soon." "Uh-huh." Rachel should have left. She had a cafe to open in 6 hours and needed sleep herself. But the cubs looked so small curled up together, and they'd been searching for their mother all night. And Jesker was making these tiny snuffling sounds that were completely illegal in how cute they were. She sat down in the chair next to them. 5 minutes passed. The cubs slept on, oblivious. 10 minutes. Rachel found herself watching them breathe. The rise and fall of their fluffy sides synchronized. 15 minutes. The office was quiet except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Then Jesker stirred, made a small sound of distress, and his eyes cracked open. He looked around, didn't see his mother, and his lower lip started trembling. Hey, none of that," Rachel said quietly. "Your mom's coming. She'll be here real soon." Jesker looked at her with those enormous eyes. processing. Then he got up on unsteady legs, walked over to her chair, turned and tried to climb into her lap. Rachel, who had exactly zero experience with alien children and very limited experience with human children, froze. Marcus? Little help?" Marcus glanced over, grinned. "He likes you." That's not helpful. Jesker had succeeded in scrambling halfway into her lap and was now attempting to burrow into her jacket like it was a cave. His fur was incredibly soft, like someone had spun clouds into fabric. "Okay," Rachel said to herself. "Okay, this is fine. This is a thing that's happening now." She carefully adjusted so Jesker wasn't crushing any important organs and awkwardly patted his head. The cub made a pleased chirping sound and burrowed deeper. This apparently sent some kind of signal to his brothers, because Mirren and Tolo both woke up, saw Jesker being held by the tall human, and immediately decided they too needed to be in on this situation. Within seconds, Rachel had 3 Vrexian cubs attempting to occupy the same lap that could maybe, generously, fit 1.5 of them. It was like being attacked by a pile of warm, purring pillows. "This is your fault," Rachel informed Marcus, who was now openly laughing. "This is the best thing I've seen all month. I'm putting decaf in your coffee for a year." The cubs, having achieved their goal of acquiring a human, promptly fell back asleep in a tangle of purple fluff and small paws. Mirren's head was on her shoulder. Tolo was draped across her lap like a very heavy scarf. Jesker had somehow wedged himself between her arm and her torso and was snoring. Rachel, trapped beneath 40 pounds of sleeping cubs, could do nothing but sit there and accept her fate. "I can't feel my legs," she whispered. "Don't move," Marcus advised. "They're comfortable now." "I hate you." "You love those cubs, though." Rachel opened her mouth to argue, looked down at the 3 peaceful faces, and closed it again. "Shut up." This was the scene that Ambassador Kelrathi burst into 23 minutes later. Wild-eyed and radiating the kind of panic that only parents of missing children can truly understand. She took in the security office, her 3 cubs sleeping in a pile on a human woman, and stopped so abruptly that she nearly tripped over her own feet. "My babies," she breathed, her translator barely functioning through her emotional state. "They're okay," Rachel said quickly. "They're fine, just tired. We found them. They're safe." Kelrathi approached slowly, like she was afraid they'd disappear if she moved too fast. She knelt down next to Rachel's chair, and one massive paw reached out to gently touch Mirren's head. The cub stirred, blinked sleepy eyes, and made a questioning sound. "Mother?" "Yes, little light. I am here." All 3 cubs woke up then, in a tumble of fur and excitement and chirping that made Rachel's ears ring. They scrambled off her lap and onto their mother, who made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh and gathered them against her chest. Rachel stood up, her legs screaming in protest from sitting in one position for so long, and tried to quietly back away to give them space. "Wait," Kelrathi said, looking up. "You found them?" "Oh, they kind of found me, actually," Rachel said. "They wandered into my cafe. You kept them safe. I mean, I mostly just kept them from breaking anything, or themselves." Kelrathi stood, which was impressive considering she had 3 cubs hanging off various parts of her body. She fixed Rachel with a look that was intense enough to be slightly uncomfortable. "Among my people, there is no greater debt than the safety of cubs. You have earned the gratitude of House Miran." "That's really not necessary," Rachel started to say, but Kelrathi was already tapping something on her personal data pad. "I have transferred access codes for our family holdings on the station. You will always have a place in our quarters. Always. I really don't need... Jesker, still clinging to his mother's fur, reached out one paw toward Rachel and chirped. Rachel's protests died in her throat. Yeah, okay, you're welcome. Marcus, who had watched this entire exchange with the expression of someone enjoying the galaxy's best soap opera, finally spoke up. For what it's worth, Ambassador, your cubs are pretty adventurous. Might want to upgrade those door locks. Kelrathi's fur rippled through several shades of embarrassed purple. Yes, this will be addressed. Immediately. She turned back to Rachel. My mate will want to thank you as well. Will you join us for first meal tomorrow? I really shouldn't, Rachel said, even as she was already mentally rearranging her schedule. Please, Kelrathi said, and somehow managed to make it sound both like a request and like refusing would be a personal insult to her entire species. Okay, Rachel found herself saying. Yeah, okay, first meal. Kelrathi nodded, satisfied, and herded her cubs toward the door. Mirren and Tolo went willingly enough, but Jesker kept looking back at Rachel until his mother gently turned his head forward. Once they were gone, the security office felt very empty. So, Marcus said, breaking the silence. That happened. That happened, Rachel agreed. She felt weird, like something had shifted in her understanding of the universe. I need to go home and sleep for approximately 12 hours. Before you go, Marcus said. And there was something in his tone that made Rachel look at him sharply. That was good, what you did. A lot of people would have just called security and let us handle it. Yeah, well, I tried to call security. My comm was dead. But you didn't leave them. Rachel shrugged, uncomfortable with the sincerity. They were scared kids looking for their mom. Anybody would have done the same. You'd be surprised, Marcus said. But that's why humans are good at this station. We do the things that anybody should do, even when nobody else does them. Rachel didn't have a response to that. So she just nodded and headed for the door. She made it halfway back to her quarters before she realized she was smiling. The next morning, or what passed for morning on a station that operated on artificial cycles, Rachel dragged herself to the Rexian family quarters with a travel mug of coffee and very low expectations. She'd barely slept, partially because of exhaustion and partially because she kept waking up thinking she heard small chirping sounds. The door to the quarters opened before she could press the chime. Mirren stood there, looking significantly more awake than Rachel felt. Rachel Kimura, he announced formally. You are expected. Hey, kid, you sleep okay? Yes, we told father of our adventure. He was not pleased. We are confined to quarters except for supervised outings. Probably deserved? Rachel said, trying not to smile. The quarters were bigger than she expected, with high ceilings and furniture that was clearly designed for beings much larger than humans. Kelrathi emerged from another room, followed by a male Vrexian who was somehow even larger than she was. Rachel Kimura, Kelrathi said warmly. This is my mate, Thorian. Thorian inclined his head, his purple fur rippling through darker shades. You have our eternal gratitude. Our cubs speak of nothing but the tall human who ran with them through the station. I mostly ran after them, Rachel corrected. They're fast. They are troubles, Thorian said, but there was affection in his voice. Small, furry troubles who will be confined to quarters until they learn the concept of staying put. Jesker, who had been peeking around his father's leg, chirped indignantly at this. First meal was a chaotic affair involving too much food, 3 cubs who insisted on telling Rachel every detail of their adventure from their perspective. and two parents who kept exchanging looks that suggested they were still recovering from the panic of the previous night. And then you ran. But you were slow, Jesker said around a mouthful of something that looked like purple oatmeal. Don't talk with your mouth full, Rachel said automatically, and then froze. Because when had she become the kind of person who corrected other people's children's manners? Kelrathi and Thorian both looked at her with expressions that suggested they were trying very hard not to laugh. What? Rachel demanded. Nothing, Kelrathi said. It is just that you sound very much like a parent. I'm not a parent. I run a cafe. These things are not exclusive, Thorian observed. Rachel decided to focus very hard on her food and not think about implications. The meal wound down eventually, and Rachel prepared to leave. The cubs, predictably, protested. Will you visit again? Mirren asked with heartbreaking earnestness. Sure, Rachel heard herself say. Yeah, I'll visit. Tomorrow? Tolo pressed. Not tomorrow, I have to work, but soon. This seemed to satisfy them, and Rachel made her escape before she could make any more promises. She told herself, walking back to her quarters, that it was a one-time thing. She'd done a good deed. The cubs were safe, everyone was happy. There was no need to get involved. She repeated this to herself the next day, when Jesker showed up at her cafe with his father, demanding to know if humans could eat the same food as Vrexians. She repeated it the day after that, when all three cubs appeared with Kelrathi, who claimed they were on an educational outing, but really just wanted to watch Rachel make coffee. She repeated it for approximately 2 weeks before giving up entirely and accepting that she had somehow acquired 3 small purple children, who were not technically hers but might as well be. Marcus found the whole thing hilarious. So you're a mom now, he said one day, watching through the security feeds as the cubs helped, or more accurately hindered, Rachel while she tried to close up the cafe. I'm not a mom, Rachel insisted. They visit sometimes. Uh-huh, and that's why you've got cubs climbing on you like your playground equipment. Rachel looked down at Tolo, who had indeed decided that her back was the perfect climbing surface, and sighed. Shut up, Marcus. Never, he said cheerfully. The thing was, Rachel had come to Station Kepler 9 because she wanted adventure, or at least a change of scenery from Earth. She'd been running cafes for 15 years, had been through 2 divorces and 1 business bankruptcy, and had decided that starting fresh on a space station where most beings had never heard of espresso seemed like a good idea. She had not planned on cubs, but the cubs had, apparently, planned on her. It became routine. The cubs would visit several times a week, sometimes with one parent, sometimes both. They'd help with simple tasks, or more accurately, create chaos while Rachel tried to work around them. They'd ask her questions about humans, about Earth, about why coffee smelled so strange and why humans needed to drink it to function properly. She'd tell them stories about oceans and mountains and cities that stretched so far you couldn't see the end of them. She'd show them pictures on her datapad of things they'd never see in person. Forests and deserts, animals that had evolved in completely different ways than anything they knew. And somewhere in all of that, something settled in Rachel's chest that had been unsettled for years. The cubs weren't hers. She was very clear about that. They had 2 perfectly good parents who loved them fiercely and were raising them with all the care and attention that Vrexian culture demanded. But they were hers a little bit too, in the way that matters to children who find adults they trust and adults who find children they love. Vormathin, the station administrator, complained exactly once about unsupervised cubs creating disturbances in commercial sectors. Kelrathi had smiled at him, showing all her teeth, and said in a voice like honey over steel, "Are you suggesting my cubs are not supervised when they are with Rachel Kimura?" Vormithin, who had survived 3 decades in diplomatic service by knowing when to retreat, made a sound like air escaping from a punctured seal and dropped the subject entirely. The story became station legend in the way these things do. The cubs who got lost and the human who found them, who ran through the station all night, who let them sleep beneath her coat like they were her own. It wasn't quite accurate, Rachel thought. She hadn't worn a coat that night. They'd just slept on her lap until their mother came. But stories change in the telling, and the truth was less important than what it meant. That sometimes humans did things that didn't make sense by rational standards. That they took responsibility for things that weren't their responsibility. That they cared about beings who weren't even their own species. That they were, for better or worse, the kind of beings who would chase 3 purple cubs through a space station and then let those cubs burrow into their jackets and sleep. And maybe, Rachel thought one night while Jesker dozed in her lap at the cafe, while his brothers played a complicated game involving spoons and determination, maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the whole point of being human in a galaxy full of different species and different values and different ways of existing. You did what needed doing. You cared for who needed caring. And you didn't ask for permission or recognition. You just did it because it was right. Marcus stopped by with coffee from the kiosk on level 4, which was terrible, and they both knew it. But it was the thought that counted. "Still not a mom?" he asked, watching Jesker snore quietly. "Still not a mom," Rachel confirmed. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." "I sleep fine, thanks." Jesker snuffled, adjusted his position, and his small paw curled around the fabric of her sleeve. Rachel looked down at him, at his peaceful face and his ridiculous fluffy fur, and felt something warm spread through her chest. "Okay," she said quietly. "Maybe a little bit of mom." Marcus grinned. "There it is. Don't tell anyone. Wouldn't dream of it." And in the quiet of the cafe, with the station humming around them and the stars visible through the viewports, one human and one small cub slept while 2 others played. And somewhere in the universe, the distinction between species mattered a little less than the fact that everyone, human and alien alike, needed someone to search for them when they were lost, and someone to keep them safe when they slept.